On a stormy midnight in Washington, D.C., in 2025, President Donald Trump, stirred by a poignant letter from a veteran's wife, quietly slips out of the White House to seek solace in a modest chapel. There, a minister and a janitor share simple yet profound insights, sparking a moment of raw honesty that unveils a truth he hadn't anticipated confronting. The soft glow of the desk lamp cast long shadows across the Oval Office as President Donald Trump sat, eyes fixed on the handwritten letter before him. Outside, the Capitol had settled into the rare hush that follows midnight, when even the most dedicated staffers and demonstrators had retreated. The White House hummed with the quiet efficiency of a place that never truly rests. Yet, in this solitary moment, he was utterly alone. The letter had arrived that morning, tucked among classified briefings and policy memos, a plain cream envelope, unremarkable amid the stack of official correspondence. He'd set it aside until now, when the weight of his second term, begun in January 2025, pressed into his bones, and sleep remained elusive. Dear Mr. President, my husband, Sergeant Michael Reynolds, returned from Syria last month with life-altering injuries. You met him at Walter Reed, where you pinned a Purple Heart to his gown. I'm writing to thank you for that moment, though I didn't vote for you and often disagree with your policies. Michael believes in his duty. He believes in sacrifice and that despite our divisions, we're still one nation. I wonder if you share that belief. Sincerely, Jennifer Reynolds. Trump's fingers traced the paper's edge, feeling the faint indentations where her pen had pressed with conviction. No demands, no accusations, just a question that cut through the layers of armor he'd rebuilt for his return to power. The memory of Sergeant Reynolds's resolute face, despite his pain, surfaced vividly. The quiet strength in his eyes, even as he faced a grueling recovery and an uncertain future. Rain began to tap against the windows, a gentle rhythm accompanying his thoughts. The Oval Office, a familiar fortress of authority, felt vast and cold. His hand twitched toward his phone, instinct urging him to post something on Truth Social, but he stopped. What could he say that wouldn't feel hollow against the understated power of the soldier's sacrifice and his wife's sincerity? A memory flickered from earlier that evening. A rare private dinner with his son, Barron, now a young man navigating his own path. "Dad, are you happy?" Barron had asked, his eyes searching past the presidency to the man beneath. The question had caught Trump off guard. In a life measured by wins, deals, and crowds, happy wasn't a metric he'd prioritized. He'd deflected, asking about Barron's studies, but the words lingered now, an unanswered echo in the quiet. Trump stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The sudden movement startled the Secret Service agent stationed discreetly by the door. "Sir?" the agent queried, stepping forward. "I need to walk," Trump said, his voice gruff with an emotion he couldn't name. "Motorcade's ready in—" "No motorcade," Trump interrupted, softer this time. "Just me, minimal escort. 10 minutes. Sir, protocol requires—" "10 minutes," he repeated. Not a command, but a plea. The agent's face remained impassive, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of concern as he murmured into his wrist mic. Trump caught the unease, but let it pass. For once, he needed to move without the presidency's machinery encasing him like a fortress. After a flurry of hushed coordination, he slipped out a side entrance into the rain-soaked night. 2 agents trailed at a distance, the bare minimum his team had frantically negotiated. For the first time in years, no entourage, no cameras, just him and the damp air. The rain cooled his face, soaking his suit and flattening his iconic hair. He should have felt diminished, disheveled. Instead, a strange lightness settled over him. He wandered past familiar monuments, their grandeur muted by the weather. The wet streets shimmered under streetlights, reflecting fractured light in broken patterns. 3 blocks became 4, the agent's silent shadows behind him. Then he saw it, a small stone chapel, St. Matthew's, nestled between imposing federal buildings. Its modest stained-glass windows glowed faintly, a beacon in the dark. He'd sped by it countless times in motorcades, never truly noticing. Now, something inexplicable drew him closer. His hand lingered on the door's iron handle. This was absurd. Donald J. Trump, sneaking into a church like some soul-searching pilgrim. What would the headlines scream? What would his base think? His critics? He nearly turned back, but the letter's weight, paired with Barron's unanswered question, anchored him. With the impulsive energy that had defined his life, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The chapel's interior was humble. No soaring arches or gilded megachurch splendor, just worn wooden pews, dog-eared hymnals, and a plain altar. The air carried the scent of candle wax and the warm, dusty aroma of aged wood, heated by an old radiator. Near the altar, an older woman in a janitor's uniform polished candle holders with deliberate care, her movements almost reverent. In the last pew, a gray-haired man read under the soft glow of a clip-on light. Trump slid into a pew halfway down, his wet shoes squeaking loudly in the stillness. He felt acutely aware of himself, not as the president, not as a billionaire, but as a man, rain-soaked and uncertain in an unfamiliar place. Minutes passed, unmarked by the usual demands of his role. The janitor hummed softly, her melody gentle and unassuming. The reader turned a page, the sound faint but distinct. No one approached. No one asked for a selfie or a favor. No one presented a crisis requiring his decision. The silence wasn't tense or expectant. It was patient, waiting. Trump stared at his hands that had signed executive orders, waved to roaring crowds, built skylines. Now they rested empty, heavy in his lap. Does everyone get a second chance? The question slipped out, a whisper that seemed to fill the chapel. A rustle came from the back pew. The reader closed his book and approached, stopping at Trump's pew. Up close, Trump saw he was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with lines etched deep from years of living. "Reverend Thomas Wells," the man said, extending a hand. His grip was steady, his eyes kind but unflinching. As for second chances, I don't decide that. But in 50 years of pastoring, I've never met anyone who didn't need one. "Even me?" Trump asked, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. Wells smiled faintly, a warmth that disarmed without patronizing. "Especially those who think they're beyond needing it." He nodded toward the altar. "Walk with me?" Trump hesitated, then rose, his wet shoes squeaking again. Wells moved slowly, and Trump matched his unhurried pace, the silence between them comfortable rather than pressing. At the altar, Wells pointed to a carved wooden panel depicting a shepherd guiding his flock through a storm. "My grandfather carved this," he said. "He believed broken things could be mended stronger than before." His finger traced the wood's knots, where cracks had been filled with resin, creating intricate, resilient patterns. The Japanese mend broken bowls with gold. Kintsugi, they call it. The flaws don't diminish the piece. They make it more beautiful, more valuable. They paused at a stone baptismal font, its still water reflecting their faces, one weathered by years of quiet service, the other flushed with the ruddiness of power. Water holds no memory, Wells said softly. It can rage, carve through stone, but given time, it always finds calm. It shapes the world not by force, but by persistence. He stirred the water with his fingers, ripples blurring their reflections. And it can wash anything clean. Finally, they stood before a stained glass window, its colors casting patches of blue, amber, and crimson on their faces. The image showed a weary traveler welcomed home, a father embracing his lost child with open arms. Wells said nothing, letting the image speak its timeless truth, of return, of forgiveness, of grace unearned yet freely given. The colored light seemed to soften the lines of Trump's face, blending the weight of his power with the vulnerability of the moment. "I've gone too far," Trump murmured, the confession startling even himself. "Too many wrongs, too many fights." Wells nodded, neither judging nor excusing. "That's where grace starts. Not when we're perfect, but when we see we can't be." The janitor, pausing her work, watched quietly from a distance, her presence a silent witness to the exchange. When Trump, after a long pause, awkwardly lowered himself to one knee beside Wells, the janitor began to sing. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." Her voice, rich and unadorned, filled the chapel, rooted in a resilience that spoke of generations enduring hardship and hope. Trump closed his eyes, words tumbling out. Not the polished rhetoric of rallies or the sharp retorts of debates, but raw, halting truths. He spoke of fears hidden behind his public bravado, the loneliness that grew with his power, the man he'd once dreamed of being versus the man he'd become. "I don't know how to fix it," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't know if I can." "You don't fix it," Wells said gently. "Grace doesn't undo the past. It redeems the future. The question isn't whether you can erase what's done, but whether you'll choose a new path forward." Trump's final words, too soft for any but Wells to hear, were a question, a plea, a beginning. When he rose, his knees stiff from the unaccustomed posture, the janitor approached. Her face, lined with years of labor, held a quiet dignity that needed no title to affirm its worth. "Ida Mae Gibson," she said, introducing herself with the confidence of one who knows her value. From her pocket she drew a small wooden cross, its surface worn smooth by time and touch. She pressed it into his hand. "For when the path feels heavy," she said simply. The gesture, intimate and sincere, expecting nothing in return, struck him in a way no diplomatic gift or state honor ever had. The cross was warm, as if carrying the heat of her conviction. "Thank you," Trump said, the words small but heavy with meaning. Outside, the rain fell harder, a steady drumbeat against the night. His agents moved in smoothly as he emerged, their faces impassive, trained to notice nothing. One offered a black umbrella, which he accepted without comment. The walk back to the White House felt both longer and shorter than the journey out. The city's monuments loomed larger, their stone faces glistening under streetlights, symbols of a nation both enduring and fragile. Trump's hand stayed in his pocket, fingers tracing the cross's edges, a tangible reminder of the chapel's quiet truth. Not a political maneuver, not a photo op, but something beyond the power he'd spent his life mastering. Morning broke clear and crisp, the storm's residue washed from the capital's streets. The White House resumed its relentless rhythm. Staff bustling through corridors, phones ringing, decisions piling up. But those closest to Trump noticed subtle shifts. During his morning intelligence briefing, he let his national security advisor finish before responding, a departure from his usual interruptions. When an aide brought his coffee, he asked about her daughter's ballet recital, a detail he'd normally overlook. In a heated trade negotiation, his tone remained firm but lacked its customary bite. His hand occasionally found the cross, turning it over like a talisman against old habits. 3 days later, Jennifer Reynolds opened her mailbox to find an envelope bearing the presidential seal. Inside was a handwritten note, not typed by a secretary or signed with an auto pen, but penned in Trump's unmistakable hand. Mrs. Reynolds, your word stayed with me. Your husband's right. We're one nation despite our divides. I'm working to honor that belief. Thank you for his sacrifice and courage. Respectfully, Donald J. Trump. She read it twice, then placed it carefully in a frame beside Michael's hospital bed, where he could see it during his grueling rehabilitation sessions. A week later, alone in the Oval Office, Trump paused over a draft of an immigration policy. The family provisions, he told his chief of staff, they're too harsh. The aide, caught off guard, cited polling data supporting the hardline stance. Find a better way, Trump said firmly. It's bad for us. If his reasoning was framed in political terms rather than moral absolutes, it was still a step. Small, imperfect, but real. The cross seemed to warm against his palm, a quiet anchor. The following Sunday, the presidential motorcade took an unscheduled detour to St. Matthews. Trump slipped into the back pew, unnoticed by Tong Shui most of the modest congregation. An elderly woman beside him shared her hymnal, guiding him through the service's unfamiliar rhythm with a kind patience. When the offering plate passed, he fumbled, realizing he carried no cash. Presidents rarely needed it. Embarrassed, he began to wave the plate on, but the woman pressed a dollar bill into his hand with a wink. He placed it in the plate, feeling both humbled and oddly liberated. Ida Mae Gibson, now in a choir robe rather than her janitor's uniform, met his gaze with a nod, their shared moment unspoken but understood. Reverend Wells preached that day on the prodigal son, emphasizing redemption over judgment. The story reminds us, he said, his voice resonant in the modest sanctuary, that grace meets us where we are, not where we think we ought to be. It's not earned by being perfect. Concurrent modification exception. It is given to those who dare to see their own need. After the service, Trump slipped out before the receiving line formed, avoiding what could have become a media frenzy. He left a note in Wells's office. Thank you for seeing me, not the title. I'll be back. In the weeks that followed, subtle shifts emerged from the White House. Nothing dramatic enough to alienate his base or signal a complete reversal, but enough to be noticed by those paying close attention. A stalled infrastructure bill gained traction after Trump personally called moderate lawmakers to broker a compromise. A planned deportation action targeting families was quietly scaled back, refocused on individuals with serious criminal records. In a meeting with community leaders on urban development, he listened more than he spoke, a fact noted with surprise by attendees. His public persona remained largely intact. His rallies still carried their familiar energy, his posts their mix of boasts and challenges. But moments of restraint, empathy, and humility flickered through, like light breaking through a clouded sky. "I wanted to deliver this myself," Trump said, his voice softer than his public persona, less performative. "Less red tape for you both." He slid the folder toward them. Inside were documents expediting specialized rehabilitation services and adaptive housing grants, previously delayed in bureaucratic channels. "It's not enough," he admitted, "but I hope it eases the road ahead." "Thank you, Mr. President," Michael said, his voice steady despite his physical challenges. "This means more than you know." Trump nodded, then hesitated, grappling with something internal before continuing. "Your wife's letter said you believe in service, that we're one nation despite our differences. She asked if I believe that too." "You don't have to answer," Jennifer said quickly. "It was forward of me to ask." "No," Trump said firmly. "It was the question I needed." He turned the cross in his hand, a gesture that had become habitual in moments of reflection. "I'm trying to believe it. I'm trying to live like I do. Some days are harder than others." The admission, unguarded and unscripted, bridged the gap between three people who likely disagreed on nearly every policy. "That's all we can do," Michael said simply. "Try each day to be better than the last." As Trump left, he paused at a hospital corridor window, watching families come and go, some celebrating, others leaning on each other through pain. A microcosm of the nation, bound by shared humanity despite their differences. His reflection stared back from the glass, the same face that had graced newsstands and screens for decades. The same blonde hair, now thinner. The same strong jaw, now softened slightly with age. But the eyes seemed different, more present, more human. He reached for his phone, not to post online, but to dial a number he'd entered himself. "Barron, it's Dad. How about a fishing trip this weekend? Just us." His son's laugh warmed him. "Secret Service too, huh?" "They'll stay back," Trump promised. "I'm looking forward to it, kid." Later, he met Wells to discuss a faith-based community initiative Trump had unexpectedly championed. The pastor stood as he entered, but there was no deference or anxiety, just the quiet recognition of two men crossing paths on different journeys. "Reverend, thank you for making time. Thank you for making this a priority, Mr. President." They discussed logistics, funding, implementation, metrics, but beneath the policy talk ran a current of shared understanding, a sense that their work transcended partisan lines. As the meeting ended, Trump asked a question that would have been unthinkable months before. "Would you pray with me, Reverend?" For courage to do better. Without surprise, as if it were the most natural request, Wells nodded. They bowed their heads in the presidential limousine, the leader of the free world and the pastor of a small chapel, two mortals seeking wisdom beyond themselves. Outside, the sun dipped below Washington's skyline, bathing the monuments in gold. Inside, in the quiet space between intention and action, between past and possibility, something continued to unfold. Wells and Gibson, back at St. Matthew's, added a name to their prayers. They knew the truest changes aren't loud or instant. They're the slow, persistent work of a soul asking, "Can I start again?" And the answer, woven through centuries of human struggle and hope, remains, yes. It is never too late to begin anew.